Great. So good to see everybody. Hey, Vic. Hey, I saw your post today. I think it was a post from today that you're connecting with audio, I see, but you had to do some snake removal.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. All right. He didn't get to hear me. I don't think he heard me. So Vic, I was telling about, I saw your post about your snake removal. You didn't know that was part of the job description, right? Awesome. Hi,
Unmute
Arlene.
dummy. There you go. I've done worse. I've
Oh yeah?
chased, let's say I've chased elk. I chased a snapping turtle. Yeah, I've done all kinds of fun. Actually, Jared was with me when we did the snapping turtle.
What?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, what's the snapping turtle story? Come on.
He
Well,
looked like he was stuck, so I helped him along.
aha.
I forgot about that.
We've come across those soft shell turtles, those big fat ones. Those guys are kind of weird to mess with. So
Oh, well, that's a great way to start this. Tell us some of the stories of some odd things that you may have come across. So far we have a snake, we have a snapping turtle. Anybody else ever come across anything really odd? I know birds. We're
I,
constantly battling. Hi, Sharon. We're constantly battling with the birds. Anybody else got anything that they've come across? We'd love to hear it. Put it in the chat. Open up the mic. We're good with that. I love hearing funny stories. Right now, I've just had the birds, yeah, and especially the Inspire 2. They love the birds. Love that one.
yeah, birds, cows, coyotes. Um, I don't think I've had any bears or anything, but horses. We get a lot of horses too.
Ah.
Pasture.
Yeah. So sometimes the horses, especially the wild ones or ones that are not familiar with it, they are very spooked by the drones. I have several out here at our house that are very used to drones, and they look at me going, "Oh, here we go again." They don't mind them at all. All right. Well, we are all about networking. So I do want to kick this off with an opportunity for you to share, and we like to use the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat. And I know some platforms aren't able to see everything or view everything or make comments on stuff. So if you are making comments and we aren't able to get to it, we'll send those out to Jared ahead of time or later on, and he'll be able to address any comments and questions. But we do have someone that's monitoring them, so we'll do the best we can on that. But put your information into the chat and reach out, network. That's what we're all about. It's a perfect opportunity to share what you're doing in the industry and where you're at, because this is a very global platform that we have here. With that, I know we have several people here excited to hear from our spotlight speaker for today. We have Jared Janacek today with mapping legally with drones. He's based in Texas, and in my opinion, he is an expert, and I think you're going to agree with me after you hear from him. So, Jared, I'm super excited to have you here with us today. I'm going to make you spotlight. And if you can share, just kicking it off, a little bit about your background and what you're doing in the industry, that'd be fabulous.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. Always fun to get on and kind of shed some light onto this part of the industry. We know that this part of the industry gets a ton of questions, and they're for very good reason. There's lots of questions to ask. So, but my company, we started in 2017. And we are primarily a mapping focused company. And we are constantly flying orthomosaics and those types of mapping type missions and whatnot. We service all kinds of different industries. We work very closely with surveyors. We work very closely with engineers. We work in the mining and aggregates industry, and then we also work a lot with construction as well. We've done everything from, I've done wind turbines, and we've done inspections and oil and gas and just everything that you can think of. But as a true drone service provider, we've kind of settled into our lane and really kind of pursued that quite a bit. So today we just wanted to touch on this, mapping legally with drones. Oh, one other thing. I do teach the drone mapping courses at the Pilot Institute. So if you're interested in learning more about that, that's kind of a ground up conversation that we have. I think it's 20 hours worth of classwork, but we really start with the fundamentals and really get you to understand the practices and what is happening with not only the acquisition and the software, but how to get all the way through to something that you can deliver to clients. And it's a course that we taught in a very deliberate manner, not just a, hey, push button, go, you get a result type of thing. So it is designed to really educate you. And we're always expanding upon that, and the private institute has a great community on the back end to ask questions, and we're available there as well. So let me share my screen here, and we'll get into this. If you have any questions, happy to answer those. So please just chime in. Like Desi said, throw your questions into the chat. Feel free to interrupt. That's the role here. There may be questions, there may not be questions, but you might come up with questions later. I'm a very extemporaneous kind of, so you're not gonna distract me too much. All right, let's go. All right. Okay, so mapping legally with drones. Let's kind of get into it, and let's kind of define this a little bit so that we can understand what we're doing. Here's what we're not going to give you today. Okay, I'm not going to give you a table of saying you can do this and you can't do that. You can do this and you can't do that. Okay, you're not going to get that. I'm not a lawyer. I am not advising you in any kind of legal capacity. I am just going to tell you how we do our research, and we're going to help you to start to do your own research and point you in the right directions, but also give you a little bit of background as to why you need to do that type of research as well. So, so please don't look for this out of this presentation. Okay. Let's start by defining some terms. Okay. Mapping is not universally defined here in the United States. There's no US law that defines it. It's typically shaped and crafted by local, state, and surveying laws. Mapping could be as simple as, your daughter drawing a map to your house on a piece of paper, right? Some people might argue that that's mapping. Some people might argue that what Google Earth is doing is mapping, or satellite mapping. Some people would argue that, drawing cities who are drawing plats and things like that are doing mapping on their GIS, things like that. But, generally it's referring to, the collection, processing, and visual presentation of this data. But the key factor here is that it does not determine, establish, or alter legal property boundaries, right? It's typically allowed for things like visualization, for planning, hey, we're going to throw an event at this park. Let's have an ortho and kind of, arrange things and kind of get a sense of what we're looking at here. Key thing, products aren't generally submitted to public agencies. And on the safe side, they're clearly marked as non-survey grade. Now, with surveying, we have kind of a technical term and then also a legal term. And so the technical definition revolves around kind of the science and the art of measuring. You're going to come across this over and over again, but measuring distances, angles, and positions on or near the Earth's surface. That means in the air as well. And then A legal definition is going to be defining a regulated profession, right? So surveying, the act of surveying itself is a regulated legal profession defined by law in most states, okay? So there's a technical definition. What is it? Well, it's measuring things, right? Observing things. It's an art. There's a little bit of a technical side to it as well. But then, of course, there's the legal definition. On the right, you will see the legal definition in Alabama of what the practice of land surveying is. And you can tell it's kind of long, you know. And we can kind of go through this a little bit, but that's more what a legal definition tends to look like when you start to ask, well, what is surveying? What are we trying to do here? You know, and what I want to show you today is how do we get down into the nitty gritty and kind of start to understand that. So first things first, you need to get your federal compliance out of the way. So ensure that you've got your Part 107 if you're doing this for any kind of commercial work. You're using drones under 55. I don't want to go over this and belabor the point. So federal compliance, there's really no, state, federal, there's no federal surveying license or anything that you can achieve. So the licensing and the regulation of surveying and the practice of it is done at the state level. But state laws and licensing, why is surveying regulated? Okay. And I think that's a pretty good question to ask. And so we want to kind of touch on that here. I'm just going to try to open. Desi, if you see anything come in on chat, definitely let us know.
All right, Sheila's already asked a question about just kind of to generally everybody. Has anyone run into any legal issues by placing measurements and not being a surveyor, which is some of the stuff that I think you're going to be covering today, but we put that out into the chat, so we'd love to hear.
Right.
Anybody's
Yeah, we'd love to hear about people. We're going to mention a couple that we've heard of, but we'd like to, hear about as many as anyone has heard of. So that'd be great. So surveying is regulated because we're talking about, typical surveying is talking about the legal and property rights. We're defining Bob's property and John's property. We're clearly marking a delineation, right? So there's a lot involved with that, right? There's money, there's obviously value, and there are legal lines, and if an error occurs, if someone uses the wrong benchmark, or maybe they use the wrong property corner or something like that, we can have very serious legal, financial, and even societal consequences, right? You can put a road through somebody's property that they don't even have access to, right? So defining right-of-ways, claiming eminent domain, like it is the basis of our property rights, defining boundaries. We have to know where your rights end and someone else's begin. That's essentially what a surveyor is doing. They're defining your rights. And so that is a big reason why surveying is regulated at each individual state. Infrastructure development, we're going to play a part in that, the building of roads, things like that. Elevations for flood zones. You got to think about, people are going to be relying on flood elevations and things like that for adhering to building, requirements and things like that. And if you're off on an elevation, that could severely impact people's livelihood and even their public safety. And then finally, accountability, trust from the public. We want to trust our property boundaries. We want to trust that when I say this fence is here, that truly is the fence. I mean, we've all heard of fence disputes and property lines. Turns out the surveyor came out and property line was 10 feet to the right? Well, by regulating that profession, we build trust in that profession. And there's a final say kind of a thing. So it's very important to have surveying. It's one of the oldest professions. Most of our founding fathers were surveyors. George Washington was a surveyor. And these guys were out there hacking through Virginia and all over. Just and they had a lot harder of a time of it than we do. So it's interesting to think about. Let's give kind of a quick overview of what the state laws and licensing looks like and how it works. So who regulates surveying? Well, firstly, it's the legislature. So that each legislature in your own state is going to write a law that will, sometimes the law defines what surveying is. Oftentimes it will certainly define who a surveyor is, what the requirements are to be a surveyor, different things like that. There's some definitions written into the laws specifically. But most of the time, they're going to create some kind of a board to oversee that profession. And so the law is something that we're going to look at a lot, the text of the law itself, to kind of understand where are we, what kind of rights do we have, where are we overstepping boundaries, things like that. And then we might look to the board itself to see, are there any rules, are there any procedures, expectations, educational upkeep, things like that we need to adhere to, that the board has maybe clarified or something like that. All of the boards in all the states are called differently. In Alabama, it's called the State Board of Licensure for Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors. South Dakota, they call it the Board of Technical Professions. Wisconsin, they're going to lump a few more folks into there. And Ohio, simply the Board of Engineers and Surveyors. So every state is going to call it something a little bit different. Generally, a Google search will kind of help you out and get you pointed in the right direction. So let's go to the next one. So when you're looking to kind of see, okay, what's legal, what's not legal, it's a patchwork. So it's going to be different in every state. And so this is where you might need a lawyer, right? The language is there for all to read. You can read it and you can understand it. But there's lots of caveat, I mean, there's punctuation marks and things like that might change the reading of things. And then there's interpretations of it. How far is this carried? And this might be referring to a different section, or maybe there's another section that talks about something that kind of very closely aligns with this. So, I'm going to tell you, probably enlist a lawyer and start to say, hey, let me clearly kind of define where I need to be and all of these types of situations, So let's look at just one of them here real quick. Let me see if I can pull up another window here. You all see this?
Yes.
Oh, the other window, Desi?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, okay, great.
The list of states.
Okay, great. So what we've done is we've compiled a list of the states, the names of the boards, their abbreviations, their websites, links to the actual laws that state all of this, and determining factors, right? And a lot of other providers that we know of have done very much the same thing, right? That's time consuming and it takes effort and money and all of that kind of stuff to do it. So, it's going to be something that you have to take over for yourself. But I wanted to show you what some of these websites look like so that we can begin to kind of investigate this on your own and show you just kind of, hey, let's kind of walk through this a little bit. And I'm approaching this from a very elementary point of view, a very kind of, hey, let's start at the beginning type thing. So, so if we're looking, we found, let's skip the Google part, and we've got to the Mississippi Board of Licensure for Professional Engineers and Surveyors. Okay, this is that board that I was speaking about that was created. And once you get here, across the top, you pretty quickly run into laws, rules, and requirements. Okay, this is a great place to start. So it would be good to just click on licensure licensure law. And then it's going to say, in order to safeguard the health and property, there's some laws that we look at. For a full copy of the law, click below. And then that takes you to the Mississippi Code of 1972, Title 73, Chapter 13, Professional Engineers and Surveyors. And so when you click that, we're looking at the law, right? And so if you just break it down, engineers must be licensed, blah, blah. I'll typically do a search for survey. 216 times. All right, so 73, 13, 73 is the section. And then here you go. So real briefly, no person shall practice surveying without having first been duly and regularly licensed by the Board of Licensure for Professional Engineers and Surveyors. The practice of surveying, which must be performed by or under the direct supervision of a professional surveyor, and each map must be stamped with a seal, blah, 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 includes, but is not limited to. That's a pretty broad scope right there. The following: property and boundary surveys, subdivision surveys and plats, public land surveys, easement surveys, right-of-way surveys, lease surveys, and all other surveys that require the establishment or reestablishment of property boundaries. So there's your definition of the practice of surveying in the state of Mississippi. So that's something that you need to continue on, keep reading. It says duties within the practice of surveying, which must be performed under the direct supervision of a professional surveyor or professional engineer, include, but are not limited to, determining the configuration or contour of the Earth's surface or the position of fixed objects thereon, commonly known as topographical surveys, performing geodetic surveying, which includes surveying for determination of size and shape, utilizing angular or linear measurements, determining the use of principles of surveying, the position for any survey control, non-boundary management, creating, preparing, or modifying electronic or computerized data, including land information systems and geographic information systems, relative to the performance of the activities in the above described paragraphs. So that right there says that you can't create an electronic data without being under the direct supervision of a professional surveyor or professional engineer in the state of Mississippi.
Wow.
So it's pretty limiting, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty limiting there. So you need to do this on your own. You need to go through, look at these things, understand these things, and then adjust what you're doing to meet these standards in these different areas. And I think what we might find in our industry is that it's probably a lot more limiting than we all like to admit. So, some are going to argue one way and some are going to argue another way. And those are arguments that we'll talk about a little bit later. But they're, maybe they're valid and maybe they're not, but this is where you go to the code. Let's look at another one. Here's Ohio Board of Engineers and Surveyors. You've got your licensing, your firms, education and verification, about us. I've never been to this site before, so let's browse it ourselves. Let's see. They've got their roster, exam info, laws and rules down here at the bottom. So we'll click on laws and rules, and then links to the Legislative Service Commission's website for the complete laws and rules. Ohio Code, Chapter 4733. So we'll open that in a new tab. There you go. Board members, talks about the board. First off, they tend to establish the board, but here at the very top, they're going to define some things. So they're saying the practice of engineering is this. professional surveyor means this, and the practice of surveying means this. And it's, it is fairly broad. It is any professional service that requires the application of special knowledge. You see this term all the time, special knowledge, special knowledge. What does that mean, right? Of the principles of mathematics, the related physical and applied sciences, relevant requirements of the law, adequate performance, right? Measuring the area or the contours or any portion of the Earth's surface. Say I wanted to do golf courses. Say I wanted to map a golf course and I want to tell the golf course guy how big his green is. I'm going to define and say, hey, this green is, 2,300 square feet. Is that legal? I don't know, right? Defining an area,
Yeah.
quantifying an area, right? Now, in some states, they'll say, well, if you're doing it for legal descriptions, right? If you're doing these things in the practice of, in the practice of this or in the practice of that, then that's it. But this is pretty much just saying it's a professional service. A, are you measuring this professionally? The area of a green. Yeah, probably. You're getting paid for it. Does it require the application of special knowledge? Well, you need to know a little something, I guess. And then saying you're doing the correct determination. So I guess the question is like, if I'm the PGA, right, and I'm gonna do a broadcast in the state of Ohio, and I'm gonna put on my television screen that this green is 2,300 square feet. Did I just practice surveying? According to the state? I don't know. That's a question, right? So you start to ask a lot of these types of questions and really kind of dial it down. So sometimes the states will have in the code the reasoning behind the behavior, right? Sometimes it's not clearly defined. Sometimes you're going to need to consult a lawyer to say, hey, what do you think? The application is solely for their own. They just want to know how much fertilizer to put down, right? I mean, landscape people need to know how much fertilizer to put down. They're measuring a lawn every day, right? Length times width. They just need to know how much to put down, right? Is that the act of surveying, right? So there is a line there somewhere, and it has to be defined. A lot of it, what we find, is in what you call it, and we'll talk about that later.
So
yeah.
Jared, Vic asked a question in our chat. What if you put drone into your search? Will it bring up specific about drones and measurements?
For the most part, I don't see a lot of drone in the codes
yet.
Right. So here's Ohio laws. I just searched drone. This is talking in a completely different section. This is talking about commercial facilities and police stations, and Vic probably knows more about this than I do on this particular law. So no, it's not done here. But let's look. That's a good question. I do this all the time, right? Okay, here's what the law says. Okay, I got it. Now let's look for the next thing, which is a declaratory statement. Okay. You might need a lawyer for this part too. Okay. So a declaratory statement is an opportunity for you where someone has asked the board for their opinion on something. And here's Florida's. So Florida has really good publishing. They publish their stuff online really well. But it's talking about, hey, here are the questions that were brought before us, and this is our response. So here you have Jack Butler, who brought this petition about photogrammetry. This one caught my eye, right? Immediately zeroed in on this. And so if you look at the petition, it's a scanned PDF. You're going to do a lot of legal reading in these research, right? But basically, this guy, Jack, along with Florida Surveying and Mapping Society, this guy, and Private Photogrammetric Surveyors, Inc., Management Association, so MAPS, it's called MAPS, it's an association. They want to know, they ask some questions. They're like, hey, being that we do all this stuff, we think you have jurisdiction. This is what we're doing. The question is, we have 8 questions for you. We need a clarification regarding the definition of the practice of surveying and mapping contained in the code, and whether professional activities involving mathematics and physical sciences fall within the scope of such practice, right? And then secondly, we ask whether the licensure is required to compile vector objects from raster images. Okay, so if I took a picture of a sidewalk and I wanted to outline the sidewalk into a vector shape. Third, whether licensure is required to engage in photogrammetry. Fourth, whether the process of LiDAR collection and analysis falls within the definition of survey mapping. Fifth, and you can continue to work through and read this, right? So someone has asked the question that we're all asking, and we want to know, in the state of Florida, and the board finds that the interveners are affected, so they can do that. And they say, this petition is basically similar to this one, and it's in regard to this, and the petition for the leave has been granted, but the petition was denied. And that's it. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what that means, right? What you can do is maybe feed it into ChatGPT or AI of your choice and let them kind of decide what it means, but I wouldn't rely on that either, right? So call a lawyer and say, hey, what does this mean, right? I mean, I know what it means, but what does it mean, and so it just gets this. We're very lucky here in the state of Florida where they've actually, it's all laid out right here, right? You don't get this in the state of Mississippi. You don't get this in other states sometimes, okay? So look for these declaratory statements. They might help you in understanding what's going on within the industry in your specific state.
We have a couple more suggestions as far as like under the search would be SUAS, Unmanned Aviation System, a couple others that may bring up other information in the search.
It might in the search. I've traditionally, because of what we're looking for, and we're seeing, I don't want to get in trouble with the survey board.
All right.
Can I do this, right? Certainly, like in Texas, we have 423, which is the section of the code that governs the conduct of flying in the state of Texas with an unmanned system. And so you want to make sure that there are no kind of laws that govern the actual use of drones that might prevent you from mapping. And so, okay, I can use the drone to map. Great. That's what's defined in section 423. Now, the section in surveying, that tells you whether or not what you're doing with the drone is considered surveying or not, right? So we're defining the conduct that you're performing and deciding whether or not it is surveying. So there's 2 places to get in trouble, right? So, okay. Here's a great tool, right? Work alongside surveyors. This is great, right? You want to develop relationships within this industry, right? Why don't we go and get licensed as surveyors? Let's just do that. Let's all just go get licensed as surveyors. What we found is that licensing process, there are only 2,000 surveyors, maybe 3,000 surveyors in the state of Texas. There are 60,000 professional engineers in the state of Texas and only 3,000 surveyors, and over 65% of those surveyors are over the age of 55. So it is an industry, it is a profession that is kind of struggling, right? And I think, and I know, as a matter of fact, because I'm a member of TSPS and these NSPS organizations, that they are cognizant of that, and that they are like, how do we bring in more young people into this industry? We want to protect it, right? Because it is a regulated industry and we're doing good. We can't just loosen the regulations to let everybody in, but it's a question that they struggle with, right? So, but like I mentioned at the top, we work with a ton of surveyors, right? We work directly with them, and we provide capture services for them. We also provide support services with them in different states. The terminology could be different. You could have to call it this in one state legally. You might have to call it this in another state, right? The surveyors might offer you guidance in what that could or couldn't be called. You might have to be an employee of the surveyor to be able to qualify for an exemption like that, to fall under those terms. That's why we do say that some legal questions may still arise. Okay. So you're going to have to look at the law. So jumping back into the law here, there's some, and I don't know that I will be able to find it just immediately.
So while you're looking, do
Yeah.
you have recommendations for how someone could just start to buddy up with a surveyor? Because I've seen also where, like you said, they're a little bit more old school, and so they're not adapting to the new technology well. And so, do you have any recommendations of how someone could approach that and just do their sales pitch to try to get their foot in the door?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you got to look at the market that you're in. And you have to understand why would a surveyor not want to use a drone? Are they too old school? They just never want to use it. Maybe they just don't do that type of work. Maybe they only do Alta surveys and that's all that they're interested in doing. So they find themselves not wanting or needing the use of a drone, what they think they don't need, right? So that might be something that you run into. But what I would do is kind of look at them. We try to attend industry trade events. We've, like I said, joined the Texas Society of Professional Surveyors as an associate member. So we're like a support member, right? Just like someone who sells them insurance or something like that. We sell them, ancillary services. And so as part of that, we get to go to meetings and we get to meet surveyors and talk to them and say, hey, what are your concerns with our industry? They love the idea that, hey, we're bringing in new blood and we've got all these young people who are interested, but we need to caution it. We need to pump the brakes. We need to make sure that things are being done correctly. We need to be sure that education is happening and things like that. We're a member of ASPRS, which is the American Society of Photogrammetrists and Remote Sensing. So that is an organization that often coincides with surveyors. But utilizing those different trade routes and those trade organizations is a great tool to kind of get you next to those types of people, so that you can start to develop those relationships. Of course, your local chamber of commerce, things like that, and then just knocking on doors, right? Just saying, hey, I would like to start a conversation with you. Maybe what we can do can help supplement you in your work. Have you thought about how this can be used? I'm sure that nowadays you're probably going to run in. Yeah, we know about them. We either use them or have them ourselves, or or using them in some way internally. So
Yeah, thanks.
yeah.
Great advice. Yeah.
So real quickly, this was we were talking about working under surveyors and things like that. So even that is defined in the law quite often. So here you see, I think this is California. This is any person practices land surveying or professes to be a land surveyor when they're in charge. A subordinate is any person directly supervised by a licensed land surveyor or registered who assists blah, blah, in the practice, right? And so you'll find there are definitions that are called out here that say, hey, because with only 3,000 surveyors in the state of Texas, not every surveyor is the guy out there holding the rod, measuring the ditch, right? So how do they get around that, right? How do you know that your guys in the field holding the rods are doing it correctly? Well, they're under the direct supervision or the direct charge, right? So there's language there, right? And that's how they're kind of expanding their ability to get work done. So but yeah, here's in Texas, this was recent, the Board of Engineering and the Board of Survey was recently combined in the last legislative session, or a couple ago. And so they've kind of mashed it all together. Now we've got 116 pages of definitions and everything. And most of it, quite frankly, is about what qualifications of engineers and surveyors, because engineers will come from other states, surveyors will come from other states, and we need to know what kind of reciprocity do we have and things like that with folks. So you read through a lot. So okay, so let's move along to best practices, right? How do we make sure that we stay on the right side of the law when we're talking about these services and doing things? It's the way that you market your services. Know what you can do legally and what you can't. Don't do anything that you can't do illegally, right? If I can't delineate property boundaries, we never put property boundaries on a North Hill, right? That's not what I'm able to do, right? So you don't do it. You just don't do it. And you tell your customers up front, hey, we're not surveyors. We can't do these things. We can work with surveyors. In fact, we do work with a lot of surveyors, and we would enlist their help in these things. So we're going to look towards them, and we're going to take their advice and work under them and blah, blah, blah. But we don't do these things, right? So it's all in about how you talk and market your services. Your deliverables and disclaimers, you can put disclaimers on these deliverables. Hey, this ortho is not to scale. It's not to be used for legal descriptions, things like that. Again, consult with a lawyer to understand what kind of disclaimers you should use. I'm not professing to advise anyone in that instance. Client education. Well, I'm gonna put something up here. Just call the board. Call the board in your state, right? And say, hey, here's what I do. Here's what I want to do. Here's my customer, right? Here's what they want to do, right? My customer just wants to figure out how much fertilizer to put down, and they don't want to have to hire a land surveyor to do it. Can I do that? I have the tech. It's not a legal thing. We're just saying the backyard is 6,200 square feet. Can I do that? And call them and give them those use cases, because now you're making the board start to say, well, yeah, I mean, that kind of seems kind of silly. You're starting to really introduce some of the use cases that we're seeing and that we're being asked about every day, but we're super hesitant about, because ultimately at the end of the day, we'll talk about this in the future section, we want clarification. We want some bifurcation here. We want to know, what can we do legally? What can we not do legally? Let's get the board involved. Let's start to understand this and make sure that we have clarity. So client education, like I said, talk to your clients, let them know, hey, there are legalities here. Your clients, they're always going to trust me. They're always going to tell you to break the law. So they just want what they want, right? So it's up to you to stand firm, right? And you got to say, well, no, I know you said you promised that you won't use this, but trust me, somewhere down the line, someone's gonna get a hold of this, blah, blah, blah. So so you've got to educate your clients, right? And talk to them about it. And then look over any kind of documentation, any kind of contracts that you get, fine tooth comb. Just be aware, be very aware of things that you're doing and things like that. The why? Because there's legal risk. Okay. You could receive cease and desist letters from the board. People have. Okay. You can be under investigation from the board. People are, right? Fines, fees, reputation, right? If you go to any of these websites, there's a whole list of penalties and fines and stuff, and they publicize it because they want the public to know, don't do business with this person. Don't do business with this person, right? It is about educating the public. That's the entire reason the board exists. So you want to protect your reputation. There's industry damage. You're just going to damage the industry, right? You're going to do something that gets and makes its way to, some obscure member of the board or somebody's friend who's the neighbor of a member of the board or something. And that is going to get back. And now it's going to become a problem, right? Now it's going to become an issue. So you're going to cut our legs out from underneath us before we can go through and build our use cases. Just like with the FAA, we've got to build our use cases and we've got to build safety records and all of these things. We are doing that within industry ourselves. We are working with ASPRS. ASPRS is decades behind on, accuracy standards and things like that, because drones have come in the past since 2017, and they've completely changed the game as to how many control points we need on the ground, right? ASPRS standards would say you can't do an ASPRS survey or, photogrammatic map with less than 30 control points. There is not anybody out there who tells you that you have to do 30, right? Because the technology is so much better now that you just don't need it, right? So we've sat on the board meetings of those, we've on those committee meetings of, hey, we need to change this standard. We need to adapt. We need to understand how the technology is speeding along quite literally at light speed, and how that's going to be affecting all of these things. Because every major company, every major construction company, every major mining company, every major real estate agent, everybody is mapping with a drone, right? And the boards are going to have to cease and desist everybody and sue everybody and blah, blah, blah. And so part of enacting law is, are you applying the law equally and fairly across everybody, right? So technology has made some things easier, some things harder. We still want to protect the public good. We have to define these things. But these are conversations that we have to have from a position of trust, right? We have to we can't be cowboys, so we need to come in, build that trust, work gingerly, work softly within these industries. And so industry damage is my biggest concern, right? And I harp on this in that mapping class that I teach at Pilot Institute. I told those guys, I said, I'll teach this class, but I get a whole 10-minute lecture on this, right? Because I want to make sure that we drive this point home. So, and ultimately, you can get things to criminal charges if you take it, if things get pretty much. So let's talk about the future real quick. New laws every year, right? Legislature is always in session. Here in Texas, we at least get a 2-year reprieve. So be involved. Join organizations, ASPRS, National Society of Professional Surveyors. There are state chapters of the NSPS. Join your state chapter, local chapters even, right? So here in Dallas, I think we have 2 or 3 chapters, right? So depending on which side of the highway I want to go, I'll go to Fort Worth or I'll go to Dallas. So find and get involved with your chapters. And then the DSPA, right? We got Vic out there. Vic is helping to advocate for us. These are the types of things that, Vic's kind of large scale. Hey, we got to, at least be able to fly these things. But these are some of the issues that we'll attack as well, when and if they come up, as they come up. So get involved. And specifically wanted to touch base about the North Carolina court case. But real quick, I see Daniel, would using the polygon from the county GIS count as survey. Yes, no. They would say no. They try to, at least all the CADs that I look at, they try to very quickly tell you these are not legal definitions. This is only for informational purposes only, blah, blah, blah. So most of the time they're putting a disclaimer on it. And so is a disclaimer, if a disclaimer is good enough for them, is it good enough for us? That's a question. So, but I would say most of the ones that we come across, they're way off, way off. So never utilize those or trust those. When I called the board way back in like 2017, I said, hey, here's what I want to do. I want to measure a stockpile, right? I've got an asphalt company and they want to know how much gravel they have on their site at the end of the month. And I talked to the president of the board here in Texas, and he's like, yeah, that's fine. What are you talking? He's like, that's okay. That's easy. He's like, I have more problems with realtors putting lines on their maps, on their signs and their flyers that they put out than I have with that. Are you kidding me? You know how many realtors are drawing property boundaries on a flyer that they hand out, right? And that's got the board's attention, So why? Well, because it indicates, hey, here's your property boundary, right? When you buy this, you're going to get all that, right? Big difference, right? Versus, hey, what we're doing with this data is just keeping track of our inventory, right? It's an internal use. So the laws don't get that granular as to what you're doing with the data. They just say, well, the act of measuring is the survey, right? So maybe it's time to start defining a little bit more. Maybe that's a conversation we need to have. So let's talk about this North Carolina court case. It's the last thing I have. This has gotten the most attention. It's with 360 virtual drone services, Michael Jones. And this is kind of a unique court case. I think it's being argued wrongly for what we're trying to do, but I understand why it's being argued the way it is. So he's in North Carolina. He's a drone service guy, and he was offering maps for his construction companies. And then the board from North Carolina sent him a cease and desist and said, hey, you can't offer maps. You're not a licensed surveyor. And he says, well, they're not meant to be surveys, guys. We're just taking pictures and kind of offering them. It's information, right? I'm just offering information to my clients. I'm offering, well, it's freedom of speech, what I'm doing, essentially, right? And so he wanted to push back, and he, was going to end up going to court, and that's a very expensive proposition. So he enlisted the help of the Institute for Justice, I think. I'm probably getting that wrong. But basically, they'll pick up any freedom of speech case for free and do it pro bono. And so, so long as he could kind of fit into the rubric of free speech, they'll push the case. So they went to court. They lost. They went to the Fourth Circuit of Appeals, and they lost there on a 3-judge panel. And it has now been elevated to the Supreme Court. Best I can tell, I'm not a lawyer. They're working through it. It's been on their calendars for 3 months. The writ of certiorari has been granted, I believe. So they're working through it. And really what it hems on, it's like I said, it's not defining anything about the map, mapping this or mapping that. It's really leaning on, here it is. It says it's been distributed for conference for the past few weeks, since March 25. But really, let me zoom in here. They're saying essentially that, a regulatory board cannot limit your freedom of speech. They can limit your conduct, right? But they can't limit your freedom of speech. And the fact that our client is just passing along information, it happens to be information in the form of a picture or a map, is just information. It's just still speech. We're not, you can't blah, blah, blah. So what they're kind of pushing forward here, and really their argument, they lost at the Court of Appeals, but what they're saying here is that, listen, the fourth and the 11th Circuit have fundamentally different standards for deciding what is conduct versus speech. There's a dichotomy here. And the Fourth Circuit and the 11th Circuit have different standards. And so we're seeking clarification on that standard. And so that's ultimately, from best I can tell, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, what they're trying to get the court to say. Okay. And just like, hey, a medical board can dictate somebody's ability to cut into somebody, I guess, I don't know. But can they tell that person what they should or shouldn't say to their patient? I don't know, right? Is that conduct or is that freedom of speech? That's a question that I think the court is struggling with and asking. And so this kind of plays into that. I don't think that's the right question that I'm trying to ask, right? When it comes to it, I'm asking broader questions like, hey, technology has changed a whole heck of a lot. Like if I had a calculator, say before I had to be a mathematician to be able to calculate numbers, but now calculators are here. Do I still have to be a mathematician to type in the numbers in the calculator? I mean, it gets me to the same result. Do I have to be a mathematician to use said calculator? That's a question, right? I mean, the guys who are out collecting, the survey rods, I've seen a lot of them. They ain't doing it the right way 100% of the time, right? So how do we know that all that stuff is being regulated and done and approved properly? I think there's room for improvement within the laws itself. So, but you can't fight that unless you're involved. So get involved, and that's all I have. So
Awesome.
sorry
Yeah.
to go a little long.
No, are you kidding? It was fabulous information. Thank you. Wow. Really, you were diving deep into some workflow that you used. And so fantastic, really good information. And yes, you have to get involved. You have to talk the talk, know the language, know what's happening in the industry to put yourself out there and understand it and make a difference. With our technology evolving, we really do. In so many different areas, we do need to evolve and know what's really happening in the future. A lot of great stuff going on into our chat, great information and perspective. Vic had put in a couple of things, made a comment about the court case that you were discussing. And he also made a comment about a disclaimer that's this is just a pretty picture, not a legal document. And so put out some good information there. I did also put a link in the chat. So you want to save the chat. I put a link into Jared's company if you want to check that out. And also I put a link in for the mapping class that he offers through Pilot Institute. So I put that in there as well. Sheila just said, get professional liability quotes to cover yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
I know we're out of time. I actually had more questions and such like that. And this topic has been fabulous, Jared. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And it's been great because I know we have had questions come in about this situation. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time too.
Great. Yeah, appreciate it.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Vic said errors and omissions writer for your insurance. Great stuff. Adrian says, yes. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And we will see you next week. And we will be at the expo in Houston. So we'll see you there. All right. See everyone in Houston. Yes. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Jared. Fantastic.